terrain is one of the most impactful mechanics ever added to the Pokemon franchise. Terrain effects are extremely similar to weather. They are field conditions that modify the type chart, buffing certain types, nerfing others, and they do different things, like grant immunity to certain status ailments, or block certain moves from being used. But these terrain effects were even more impactful to the competitive metagame than weather ever was. Initially, these terrain effects were introduced in Gen 6, where there were no abilities that set them. They were only set by moves, like the move Electric Terrain. But in Generation 7, everything changed, as the Tapu Pokemon were added to the game. The Tapu Pokemon each set their own unique terrain effect on the field as they switch in, and these Tapu Pokemon are all extremely good. Terrain strategies were absolutely central to Generation 7 and 8 OU of competitive singles because of these Tapu Pokemon and how fantastic they are competitively. In Generation 9, the Tapus are no longer in the game, but terrain strategies still see use from time to time. And in fact, they have gotten some new and exciting options in the latest game in the franchise. Why don't we take a look at every single terrain setter in Pokemon, how they have impacted the metagames they're present in, and how strategies can be built around their terrain effects. Why don't we start off talking about Tapu Lele and the psychic terrain that Tapu Lele sets on the field. Tapu Lele was introduced in Gen 7 and it is one of the strongest Pokemon in the format. On its own merits, it's an incredible special attacker, with a psychic fairy typing, a very high special attack of base 130, respectable special defense as well. And the ability Psychic Surge really pushes Tapu Lele to metagame defining heights. This ability sets Psychic Terrain on the field, and in Gen 7, Psychic Terrain buffs the damage of all Psychic type attacks by 1.5x. That alone is very powerful and turns Tapu Lele into an incredible wall breaker with its Psychic type damage, and Fairy is very complementary since Fairy Stab with Moonblast hits the dark types that are immune to Psychic. But there's more to appreciate about Psychic Terrain, because Psychic Terrain also has one of the most powerful terrain effects in the game. When Psychic Terrain is active, all grounded Pokemon are immune to priority. You and your opponent are both immune to priority if you are grounded. This combination of enhanced Psychic type damage and immunity to priority moves was incredible on offensive teams in Gen 7, as Tapu Lele was commonly paired with Mega Alakazam. Mega Alakazam not only benefits from the damage enhancement of Psychic Terrain, it is also now completely immune to common priority moves like Sucker Punch and Shadow Sneak. And these are fantastic moves against Mega Alakazam because it's frail and weak to both of those types. Now it doesn't have to worry about that because of Tapu Lele as a teammate. Tapu Lele is one of the most incredible offense enablers we have ever seen in Pokemon for this reason. Because frail, powerful offensive threats are often countered by priority. It's a perfect effect to grant priority immunity. This is also excellent on Pokemon with the move Shell Smash, a very aggressive boosting move that boosts your attack, special attack, and speed by 2 stages at the cost of lowering your defenses. This move can end games on the spot in the right position, but one of the ways to play around it is priority. Because you're lowering your defenses, you're more vulnerable to even weaker priority moves, but Tapu Lele makes you immune to priority moves completely. Tapu Koko was the electric terrain setter of Generation 7, and was also an excellent Pokemon, one of the most powerful Pokemon in the whole format. Tapu Koko's big claim to fame is its high speed stats. 130 base speed is incredible, and with the support of electric terrain to boost your electric type damage, you also hit pretty hard. Tapu Koko has a 95 base special attack, which is good enough to pose a threat, especially with your high speed as well. Tapu Koko also has a very high attack stat actually, but interestingly, all of Tapu Koko's physical attacking options have recoil attached to them, like Wild Charge and a Brave Bird. You do occasionally see physically leaning Tapu Koko sets, but special attacking Tapu Koko sets are preferred just because they don't have that recoil attached, and your special attack is good enough anyway. Your move pool is also a little bit better on the special side. Tapu Koko is quite an interesting one. Electric Terrain, of course, boosts the damage of electric type moves, and it has one other useful effect, which is that all grounded Pokemon become immune specifically to sleep, the sleep status effect. And this actually also extends to the move Rest. Even your own Pokemon cannot use the move Rest because it puts them to sleep, and If electric terrain is active, you cannot be put to sleep at all, even with a self-inflicted one. So it's an oddly specific effect, but it's very good. Sleep is a powerful status ailment. It's probably the most powerful status ailment, in fact. Sleep will prevent you from acting at all until you wake up. It's an incredible way to disrupt enemies, and the presence of Tapu Koko in the metagame is actually kind of a nerf to sleep all around. This Pokemon was incredibly common, and the prevalence of Tapu Koko made it not really worthwhile to run sleep users. You still sometimes saw sleep users like a Mungus, but Tapu Koko significantly restricted how good sleep was in Gen 7 and Gen 8, just by existing, just by being there. It's not really something you can build a whole team around, like Psychic Terrain. Psychic Terrain has an effect that benefits specific kinds of Pokemon, which leans towards a Psychic Terrain offense archetype. Electric Terrain is more just generally useful for everyone. No one likes to be put to sleep. The Tapu Koko is assisting the entire team. There is some Electric Terrain synergy they put in the game. Alolan Raichu gets the ability Surge Surfer, which is kind of like Swift Swim or Chlorophyll. Surge Surfer grants double speed in Electric Terrain. Unfortunately, Alolan Raichu is a little bit weak, not the best at abusing this, and it doesn't help that its Electric Terrain often gets overwritten by other Pokemon. It's not like Weather where, you're not always facing an enemy Weather matchup, unless you're playing Gen 5. But there will always be some sort of enemy terrain Pokemon in Gen 7 or Gen 8. It's so central to the metagame, so it's a little bit difficult to preserve your own terrain on the field to keep this effect active. And Tapu Koko itself is honestly fast enough. Throwing Alolan Raichu on your team as well as Tapu Koko feels a bit like overlap. Tapu Koko is already kind of doing the job. But Electric Terrain, for that sleep immunity effect, has a significant metagame impact. And Tapu Koko is also a great anti-enemy terrain Pokemon because it's able to override their terrain and then probably outrun them and threaten them. Tapu Bulu was the grassy terrain setter of Gen 7, and this is my favorite of the Tapus. I love using it. It's a fun Pokemon. This is a grass fairy type, which is in some ways a good typing, but it is kind of rough that you are ×4 weak to poison. That is a point of weakness for this typing. But it's still got its usefulness, some key resistances and immunities and such. Tapu Bulu is a bulky attacker with very high 130 base attack, low speed of 75, but good defense. It's a bit of a wall breaker type Pokemon. Grassy terrain, as you would expect, buffs the damage of grass type attacks, but it has some more effects on top of that. Grassy terrain also provides a leftovers style chip healing effect to everything on the field, including your opponent. It's kind of interesting. This doesn't apply to flying Pokemon though, only grounded Pokemon receive the chip healing effect. Even though both opponents are receiving this advantage of being able to heal, I think it tends to be a bit more useful on the Tapu Bulu, because you can afford to throw a choice band on this guy and then also it has its own self-sufficient form of chip healing. It allows Tapu Bulu a bit more longevity, because it can come in and take a hit and then immediately chip hit. And a wall breaker like Tapu Bulu with a choice band is kind of aiming to one-hit KO things anyway, so it often feels as if the enemy has less opportunity to take advantage of the grassy terrain chip heal than you do, just by the nature of how things play out. And you can really lean into that with Tapu Bulu being a fantastic teammate on these wall breaker type offensive strategies. One common teammate for Tapu Bulu is Katana, who is an incredibly powerful grass type physical attacker who becomes even more powerful with grassy terrain active. And the chip healing effect comes in handy too, as you are trying to hit the field with your Katana, take a hit, and then that little bit of healing adds up. It does. Grassy terrain also has another useful effect that is a fantastic support for allies. Grassy terrain will nerf the damage of 3 specific ground type attacks by half, those being Bulldoze, Magnitude, and Earthquake. Earthquake is the most competitively relevant one. Bulldoze and Magnitude aren't really used, but Earthquake is the most common ground type attack in the whole game, and basically the ground type attack. It's interesting that you specifically nerf the damage of that, not ground type attacks as a whole. I suppose that allows Earth Power to still be threatening and other ground type attacking options like High Horsepower and Stomping Tantrum. But in essence, Grassy Terrain kind of nerfs ground types because Earthquake is their most common attack by far. And this is incredible on teammates like Heatran, who is ×4 weak to ground. Now Heatran can actually survive earthquakes. You're halving the damage of earthquake. That's basically like a Shuka Berry at all times. And grassy terrain is helping you chip heal. So Tapu Bulu is incredible at supporting ground weak allies, steel types and fire types and such. So Tapu Bulu does have more of an archetypal terrain that has multiple effects that benefit certain kinds of Pokemon, leading to these grassy terrain offense teams forming around Tapu Bulu. That's why it's my favorite of the Tapus, because I like the way you can build around it. It feels really interesting, actually. I'm fond of grassy terrain as a concept, I am. And finally, you have Tapu Fini, the Misty terrain setter of Gen 7 and 8 OU. This is a Water Fairy type Pokemon, probably the best type combo on any of these Tapus. Water Fairy is a very good type combo, and Tapu Fini is clearly designed to be a defensive utility guy with these stats as well. Very high special defense of base 130, high defense as well. Lower offensive stats, but fantastic defensive. And the move pool to back it up with such options as Defog. Misty terrain is perhaps the most unique of all the terrains, because unlike all of them, it does not boost the power of an attacking type at all. Instead, Misty terrain actually nerfs the power of dragon type attacks by half. Interestingly, Tapu Fini itself cannot take advantage of this at all, because it's already immune to dragon. It's not as if it needs dragon resistance. But this can support teammates and help you out against dragon type wall breakers that do exist in the metagame. But the more important effect of Misty terrain, and the reason to use it really, is that Misty terrain grants a complete immunity to status for all grounded Pokemon. Complete immunity. You're immune to toxic, paralyze, sleep, burn, everything. Even the secondary effects of attacks have no effect. This is an incredibly powerful effect that is universally valuable to your allies. Status is a fundamental part of the game, is a fundamental way to cripple enemies and stop them from doing what they want, like a Dragonite clicking Dragon Dance. You can burn it, or poison it, or paralyze it to actually deal with it and stop it from just sitting there gaining an advantage over and over. Status is fundamental. So to just switch in on the field with a pretty good defensive Pokemon and be completely immune to status on your whole team is massive. It's massive. This is a support for allies. It's useful on the guy itself because it can come in on like Scald and not be worried about getting burned. That's a massive point in Misty Terrain's favor. Tapu Fini is the best of the Tapus in terms of its utility. It is an incredibly reliable defogger, which removes hazards from the field. It has this universally powerful utility effect of blanket status immunity. It's an outstanding Pokemon, it is, through and through, and an outstanding effect. You don't really have Misty Terrain teams in the same way you have Grassy Terrain or Psychic Terrain teams. There's no archetype forming around this. It is just helpful to every Pokemon. And it's also anti-terrain technology overriding the terrain of the enemy. It is very good. Another useful aspect of the terrain mechanic are the seed items. These are new consumable items introduced in Gen 7 that activate immediately in the correct terrain. So the Psychic Seed will immediately be consumed if Psychic Terrain is active. This is very nice, and it is incredibly valuable on Pokemon that want to consume an item quickly to activate certain effects. The most classic synergy is with Unburden, which is an ability that grants you doubled speed if you have just lost a held item, whether it's been knocked off or consumed by you like a berry. So the seed is perfect alongside Unburden because it gets consumed instantly and activates this instantaneously. So Hawlucha is a fantastic teammate for terrain setters, no matter who they are, in fact. It's good on psychic terrain teams, grassy terrain, electric terrain, anything. What the seed actually does is grant a little defense boost, which is pretty good actually. Psychic Seed grants a special defense boost, Grassy Seed grants a physical defense boost, and so on and so forth. With how good all of these terrain setters are in Gen 7, Hawlucha was an easy fit on many teams, just as a good unburdened late game cleaner. Conveniently, Hawlucha has acrobatics, which also doubles in power if you have no held item, meaning it's 110 power flying stab option. Very powerful. All of the Tapu Pokemon are still present in Generation 8, but terrain as a whole was nerfed in this generation. Because of how prevalent and powerful terrain effects were in Gen 7, they felt the need to nerf them, which is fair. The damage bonus for electric, Psychic and Grassy terrain on their respective types was reduced from 1.5 times damage to 1.3 times. So Tapu Lele can no longer ignorantly press Psychic and destroy everything. It's dealing a little bit less damage now, which I think is a fair change that helped balance things out. This was still not enough to make terrain unviable or anything. Terrain was still incredibly powerful. All of the Tapus are still prevalent here, except for one. Tapu Bulu unfortunately got usurped by a new Grassy Surge setter, who was mostly superior, and that was Rillaboom, the new Grass-type starter of Gen 8, who has the hidden ability Grassy Surge. Rillaboom is just a mono Grass type, which actually ends up feeling better a lot of the time than Grass Fairy, because you are not ×4 weak to Poison, you're not weak to Steel. Fairy has some benefits, but Mono Grass is pretty good actually. But that's not the main reason Rillaboom is better. Rillaboom has this move right here, which is a new terrain synergy. The move Grassy Glide. This is a 70 power physical attack that has +1 priority in grassy terrain. This is incredibly powerful. 70 power is far above average for a priority move. Most priority moves are only 40 power and they're still used. So to have priority on this move is extremely strong, and the fact that your terrain is also boosting the damage further makes it even better. The Grassy Glide is one of the most prevalent priority moves in the whole game, and it completely warped everything around it in fact. It's very important to not run like a fast offensive threat that is weak to grass, because you will just get sniped by Grassy Glide and immediately stopped. Rillaboom also has a powerful move pool beyond that with options like Knockoff, which Tapu Bulu does not get. Knockoff is dark coverage and item removal. It's one of the best moves in the whole game. Big get for Rillaboom. You also have U-turn, which is proactive. It's pivoting, it's bug coverage. It's incredible. One of the best moves in the game as well. So Rillaboom has Tapu Bulu completely beat with this fantastic prio option and just a superior move pool all around. And Rillaboom kind of made grassy terrain the king of terrain in Gen 8. Tapu Lele and Koko were also very good, but Rillaboom feels particularly powerful with its fantastic Grassy Glide and all of its incredible advantages. In Generation 9, they finally cut the Tapus from the game, and upon doing so, terrain is no longer central to the metagame. Terrain strategies, in fact, are pretty rare to see in Gen 9 OU. They did create a terrain-centric legendary though. Miraidon, the box legendary of Pokemon Violet, has the ability Hadron Engine, which sets electric terrain on the field and also boosts the guy's special attack, kind of a crazy ability. They also designed the future Paradox Pokemon around this concept, as the new ability Quark Drive that they all share grants a boost to your highest stat if electric terrain is active. So there's a push for electric terrain synergy built around Miraidon, clearly. But down in the OU tier, Miraidon is not allowed to be used, and the terrain options are very scarce. Rillaboom is still here, and Rillaboom has had its fair share of metagame relevance in Gen 9 OU as the most powerful terrain setter in the game now, probably. Fantastic Pokemon just last gen, so that crosses over here. They did nerf Grassy Glide to only 55 power. Still very good, still usable, still worth running, but not what it once was. A significant power decrease. The Grassy Seed Hawlucha combo is a fairly powerful thing to do. There's also Ogerpon Wellspring, who is a grass-type teammate you can utilize for some grassy terrain synergy. In the recent tier change for April, Rillaboom did fall from OU to UU though, in a surprising turn of events. Rillaboom is kind of struggling against many of the contact-punishing Pokemon like Moltres, Zapdos, Rocky Helmet, Corviknight and such fellas as that. The grassy terrain synergy is also less powerful here. Hawlucha is good, it's usable, but it's not that difficult to stop now. There are things that can wall it, there are things that can respond to it. And in fact, Ogerpon Wellspring, speaking of that, feels like a better Pokemon than Rillaboom, since it has the Ivy Cudgel Stab, which does not make contact. It's faster, it's more threatening, it has Water Absorb, it provides more to teams. As a grass-type physical Pokemon, Rillaboom is a bit slower. It has Knockoff and U-turn, those are good. It's got Grassy Glide. It's still good, but not as good as it once was in Gen 8, as it has been nerfed slightly and the metagame surrounding it is a bit more hostile towards it. But things get a little bit dire when we look at the other available terrain setters. We have Indeedee is now the only psychic terrain setter in the game, and this is a little bit grim compared to Tapu Lele. This is a Psychic Normal type. It's actually an okay typing because you're immune to Ghost, which Psychic is usually weak to. It's actually quite a good typing, but the stats are nowhere near the power level of Tapu Lele. Indeedee is viable in OU though, with the all-in Psychic Terrain teams, which are still a solid concept. And in fact, you could argue the lack of all the Tapus to overwrite Psychic Terrain makes the strategy a bit more consistent. You see the occasional Rillaboom, but Rillaboom's dropping off a little bit, so Indeedee can support allies like Stored Power Calm Mind Sweepers. It can support Poltegeist, who is a Shell Smash threat with Stored Power conveniently, which gets boosted in Psychic Terrain, and the priority immunity is incredible on that Pokemon, as it gets brought down to 1 with its Focus Sash, and priority moves can't touch it. Actually a very powerful sweeper. These kinds of teams can work as a hyper offense, and there is also the new move Expanding Force, which is further Psychic Terrain synergy. It gains 1.5x power in Psychic Terrain, so Indeedee can actually hit pretty hard with that, which is quite cool. The only Misty Terrain setter in the game now is Galarian Weezing, who is actually quite a good Pokemon, but awkwardly, the reason it's good is because of its other ability, Neutralizing Gas, which is much more useful. Neutralizing Gas cancels the effects of all other abilities on the field, and between this and Misty Terrain, Neutralizing Gas is way more preferable, it has way more application, and it's kind of the whole reason to use the guy. So unfortunately Misty Surge on this is not quite the pick, not quite the choice. Tapu Fini had a much better defensive typing, it was more complementary to Misty Surge. Galarian Weezing's typing has its benefits, but it's not going to carry enough to make Misty Surge worthwhile. And Neutralizing Gas just has so much more ways to be useful. So you never really see Misty Terrain anymore. Misty Terrain is kind of dead. And then finally we have Pincurchin. This is the biggest downgrade from gen to gen. Because previously had Tapu Koko, who was incredible, fast, good tapping, good move pool. And he got Pincurchin, who is frankly atrocious. A really tough one. But it's interesting because Pincurchin has perhaps the highest potential of all of them, just because of how electric terrain enables all of the Quark Drive guys. That's actually something you can build a whole team around. You can spam Quark Drive Pokemon that'll receive a stat boost in electric terrain, and that's actually a team-defining effect. It's an archetypical effect. Pincurchin, though, is really struggling to exist. It has no HP stat, only 48. Its speed is 15. And it has very little going for it. Mono Electric on a slow, frail guy is just a disaster. It's not a fantastic typing for something like this. You do at least have Spikes and Volt Switch, so you can do some utility stuff. You can make some layers. You can pivot out to like a Iron Valiant or something. You also have Memento, which is a way to sacrifice yourself for a clean entry point. That's pretty good. It lowers their attack and special attack by 2, severely nerfing their damage, and then you faint, allowing you to freely pivot to an ally. I think Pincurchin electric terrain teams can work, but they are tough. They are quite tough. I actually thought this got Volt Switch. I put this in, but no, it doesn't. That's my mistake. No, you don't get Volt Switch. They can't even give you that Pincurchin. I suppose instead of that, you could run Discharge, or Recover, or Toxic Spikes, or Thunder Wave. There's some stuff. You can't even pivot. That's very grim for Pincurchin. I thought you had this the whole time. So yeah, that's Terrain in Gen 9. A shell of its former self, as the Tapus, who were really carrying the whole mechanic, have now been deleted. Rillaboom, who is carrying the torch further, is not what it once was in the metagame. It's falling off a little bit. I think Terrain is pretty interesting. I like the way that it has these unique effects like priority immunity and nerfing Earthquake and things like this that change the way you can play. You can like pivot in Tapu Lele on Aqua Jet from Crawdaunt or something and make a play there. There's gaming potential to be had. It's dynamic. It changes the field. It is kind of cool in that sense. But I also understand them cutting the Tapus from Gen 9 because the Tapus in their terrains did dominate competitive for the generations they exist. But it would be cool to see them play with this mechanic further. There's a lot of design space. I mean, they did it with Quark Drive. That's a new idea. They did it with Expanding Force, Grassy Glide, these moves that get buffed in terrain. I think we could see more of that, more terrain-centric abilities, maybe more terrains even. Why not add extra terrains? That might get a bit complicated, but they could if they wanted. I like the mechanic. I think it's in fact, more interesting than weather in some ways. It sometimes feels like weather teams are automatic, but terrain teams are not the same. There's some terrain teams, like in DD Psychic Terrain, where you see a lot of the same Pokemon, you know, the Armarouge, the Poltegeist. But that's more niche, and I like the way that, for example, Tapu Fini impacts things in the generations that existed. It feels like it has a positive impact, I would argue. But how do you feel about the terrain mechanic? How would you compare it to weather? And who is your favorite terrain setter in the series? Let me know down below in the comments. And thank you for watching.